How much longer can the Nolan Wells investigation remain stuck between unanswered questions and no arrests? Because at this point, the question is no longer simply what happened to Nolan Wells. The question is, what is preventing investigators from taking the next step? There is an emergency call that raises questions about how a request for help was handled. There are competing accounts about what happened after that call. There are questions surrounding Nolan's phone and whether a complete forensic examination has actually been performed. There are questions about communications, GPS data, surveillance footage, the identities of people involved in the timeline, and records that could potentially confirm or contradict different versions of that day. And now, attorneys representing Nolan's estate are seeking records that could help reconstruct what happened during a critical window on July 4th. Yet despite all of these questions, the public still has no arrest connected to Nolan's death.
Okay, let's do it. What if Nolan had looked like this? What if he had been a white boy? You think for a second would not been handcuffed the motherfucking second they brought that phone back to that mama? Think for a second every major fucking influencer in the world would have been jumping on board on this, saying something's fishy about this? Because he's black, it's different. You don't believe me? Okay, let's do this real quick. Since July 4th, how many videos of these teen takeover mobs have you seen that look like this? Or this? And how many have you seen that look like this? I bet not.
Now, let me be very clear. An unanswered question is not proof of a crime. A suspicious-looking gap is not proof that someone lied. And a person being mentioned in an investigative document does not make that person a suspect, much less guilty. But there is another principle that matters just as much. When serious questions exist, they deserve serious answers. And that brings us to the central question of this investigation. If the evidence is strong enough to answer the questions, why hasn't the case moved forward? Tonight, we're going back through the evidence, the legal filings, the emergency response, the phone dispute, and the unanswered timeline. Because if Nolan's death was accidental, the evidence should help establish that. If someone was responsible, the evidence should help establish that too. Either way, the answer should not be another excuse. It should be evidence. And ultimately, if the evidence establishes probable cause, it should be an arrest. The question nobody can ignore. The Nolan Wells investigation has now moved beyond social media arguments. It is moving through attorneys, subpoenas, court filings, digital evidence, and requests for records. And that distinction matters. Because online theories can spread in seconds. Court documents move much slower. But court documents can also tell us something that social media cannot. What someone is formally asking for, and what evidence they believe may exist. Recent filings show changes in the legal representation connected to the Wells family's estate matter. 3 attorneys associated with Carol Bufkin Plack withdrew from representing Christine Wansley and the Wells family in that estate proceeding. Those attorneys were Gary Bufkin, Luke E. Whitaker, and Joel J. Everett. A request was made for permission to withdraw. But there is an important limitation here. The public filing does not establish why those attorneys withdrew. There is no basis to automatically claim that it was because of a disagreement, a payment issue, a strategy dispute, or anything else. Those would be assumptions. What we can say is much simpler. The legal representation changed. And around the same period, attorney Ahmad R. Smith and his firm, A.R. Smith Law plc, became involved. Again, the available filings do not establish that Smith's arrival caused the other attorneys to leave. But something else in the legal record deserves attention. The estate is now seeking records from organizations connected to the emergency response on July 4th, and those records could be extremely important. The subpoenas reportedly target records from STO Services International and Ward Marine Services. which operates locally as STO South Mississippi. These are separate legal entities, despite their connection. The requested time period is also significant. The subpoenas seek records connected to the emergency from approximately 2 p.m. through 8 p.m. on July 4th. Think about what that window potentially covers. The original request for assistance, communications between people involved in the response, dispatch information, possible transfers of responsibility. Whether the request was canceled, who made that decision, who communicated with the people on the boat, and perhaps most importantly, what exactly happened between the original emergency call and the decision that assistance was no longer needed. Because the public record includes audio that raises questions about that sequence.
4-footer, but that's all he can give me.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I just actually got off the phone with his grandpa, who I'm guessing is the owner of the boat. And he said,
Okay.
I just hung up with him. He said that they don't need any help right now, but if something changes, he'll call me back. So.
Yet, not even 5 minutes prior, this was the emergency call.
Is it aground is the question?
No, we're not aground. We are in 17 foot of water. We're in 31 foot of water.
All right, have to ask. What do you want to do? Do you want to be towed back?
I want to get this boat unsank and towed back, yes.
The subpoena specifically seeks records concerning communications between the dispatcher and a captain, followed by a separate conversation involving a person described.
The caller described a boat that needed assistance. The caller was asked what kind of boat it was. The caller identified a Triton, and the conversation continued.
It's 17 foot of water. We're in 31 foot of water. No, we're not aground. We are in 17 foot of water. We're in 31 foot of water.
Then something obviously catches the caller's attention, and you hear dragging noise again, and then he says hello.
A person. Is there a person, a living individual on the boat?
Multiple.
Then, according to the audio supplied in the material surrounding this case, another communication occurred. A captain indicated that he had spoken with the caller's grandfather, and the captain said he understood that they no longer needed assistance. That sequence deserves to be reconstructed, not through commentary, not through someone's interpretation of an audio clip, through the actual records. Who made the call? When was it made? Who received it? Who contacted the captain? Did the original caller ever speak directly with the captain? Was the request formally canceled? If it was canceled, who authorized that? And what information did the person making that decision have at the time? Those questions are not accusations. They are basic, investigative questions. And the subpoenas appear designed to obtain records that could potentially answer them. That is important. Because the truth of what happened on July 4th should not depend on which version of the story is most persuasive on television. It should depend on what the records show. There is another reason the emergency response deserves scrutiny. The supplied material places the emergency call and the later conversation involving the captain and the grandfather very close together. That creates a critical timeline question. If help was requested, and minutes later someone told the captain that help was no longer necessary, investigators should be able to establish exactly how that transition happened, not approximately, not based on memory. Exactly. Because there is a major difference between someone told us they didn't need help and here is the documented call showing who told us, when they told us, and why. That difference could matter enormously, and this is precisely why the subpoenas matter. They seek communications, dispatch records, policies, training records, agreements, and information identifying the people who made key decisions. That could potentially establish a much clearer timeline. And if the records contradict a public account, that matters. If the records support the public account, that matters too. Either way, evidence wins. But the emergency response is not the only unresolved issue. There is another piece of evidence that has become central to this investigation: Nolan Wells' phone. And this may be one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. Because a modern smartphone can contain an extraordinary amount of information: location data, messages, application activity, photographs, metadata, cloud synchronization, device activity, and potentially remnants of information that a user believes has been deleted. But there is an important distinction. Simply looking through a phone is not the same thing as performing a forensic examination. A person scrolling through a camera roll sees what the operating system makes visible. A forensic examiner can potentially examine underlying databases, application records, system artifacts, and other information that is not visible through ordinary use. That distinction is critical, because much of the public debate has centered around allegations that certain digital activity may have disappeared from Nolan's phone. But there is a problem. Without a properly documented forensic examination, the public cannot confidently determine what was deleted, when it was deleted, how it was deleted, or whether it was ever there in the first place. And that means everyone arguing about the phone from the outside should be careful. The family cannot prove everything simply by looking at the device. The friend's attorney cannot definitively rule out forensic artifacts simply by saying that nothing was deleted. Commentators cannot establish digital evidence by looking at screenshots. The answer requires forensic work. And that's exactly why the dispute over the phone matters. Why not just examine it? Here is where this investigation reaches a frustrating point. According to the supplied material, Nolan's family's representatives have expressed willingness to participate in a forensic examination, but they have wanted safeguards around how the device is handled. That includes questions about chain of custody, who handles the phone, how the device is imaged, who has access to the extracted data, what forensic tools are used, how the original device is preserved, and whether independent experts can participate. Those concerns should not automatically be interpreted as obstruction. At the same time, investigators have a legitimate interest in obtaining evidence that they believe may be relevant to an active investigation. So what is the solution? Not another press statement. Not another television argument. Not another social media war. A documented legal process. If investigators have probable cause and believe the phone contains evidence of a crime, there are legal mechanisms available to compel production or authorize examination. The exact mechanism would depend on the circumstances and applicable law, but the larger point is simple. Evidence should not remain trapped in a procedural argument indefinitely. If the phone clears people, examine it. If the phone raises new questions, examine it. If the phone confirms the existing timeline, examine it. If the phone contradicts the existing timeline, examine it. That is what evidence is supposed to do. The phone could help everyone. This is something that gets lost in the public argument. A forensic examination of Nolan's phone does not automatically help one side. It could help everyone. Imagine the examination finds no evidence of deleted communications. That would matter. Imagine the location history supports the timeline provided by witnesses. That would matter. Imagine the phone shows something investigators did not previously know. That would matter. Imagine the device contains evidence that contradicts someone's account. That would matter even more. The point is not to examine the phone because someone already believes a particular theory. The point is to examine it because the evidence can test every theory. That's what makes forensic evidence so powerful. It doesn't care who has the better public relations team. It doesn't care which attorney speaks better. It doesn't care which theory has more followers. A verified digital record simply tells investigators what the device recorded. And if Nolan's phone contains answers, those answers should be pursued. The other timeline questions. Then there are the other questions surrounding July 4th. Who was on which boat? Who operated each vessel? Who traveled where? When did they leave? When did they return? What did witnesses see? What did investigators document? And what can be independently verified? Some online analysis has attempted to reconstruct the boat movements through photographs, GPS information, social media posts, and witness accounts. Some of those leads may deserve investigation, but there is an important line that must not be crossed. A photograph does not automatically prove who was on a boat. A social media friendship does not prove two people were together. A similar piece of clothing does not establish someone's identity, and a name appearing in an investigative document does not prove that person witnessed or participated in anything. Those are leads. They are not verdicts. And if this investigation is going to move forward, investigators need to separate the two, because the strongest evidence is not the evidence that looks suspicious. It is the evidence that can survive verification. The GPS gap. One of the more interesting claims in the supplied material involves GPS data connected to a vessel. The account describes a boat traveling through Fort Bayou during the return trip. There was reportedly a short stop associated with a mechanical issue. But the GPS information described in the material reportedly shows another period of inactivity lasting roughly 30 minutes. Now, this is exactly where discipline is required. A 30-minute gap is not proof that a crime occurred. It is not proof that someone was hiding something. And GPS data itself must be authenticated. Investigators would need to establish what device generated the data, whether the timestamps are accurate, whether the device was actually on that vessel, and whether the data has been preserved properly. But once those questions are answered, a discrepancy between a witness account and authenticated machine-generated records deserves investigation. Because if a person remembers a 2-minute stop, but a verified device shows a much longer period, investigators should want to know why. Maybe there is an innocent explanation. Maybe the witness remembered incorrectly. Maybe the GPS record is being misunderstood. Maybe something else happened during that period. The point is, find out. That is what an investigation is for. The missing camera footage. Then there is another potentially important piece of evidence: security cameras. According to the supplied account, cameras at the residence where the boat was docked were functioning and captured the group leaving that morning. But footage showing the return has reportedly not been available. Again, there are innocent explanations. Security systems overwrite footage. Hard drives fail. Cameras lose power. Cloud subscriptions expire. Some systems do not record continuously. And if investigators were not aware of the significance of the footage soon enough, it may simply no longer exist. But if the system was functioning, investigators should be able to establish what it recorded and what happened to that footage. Because imagine what a return video could potentially show. Who arrived? Who got off the boat? What time they arrived? Who was present? And perhaps even whether Nolan was among them. One camera could potentially answer questions that thousands of social media posts cannot. That is why evidence preservation matters. No more internet verdicts. There is something else we need to address. This case has become an online battlefield. One side believes the friends. Another side believes the family. Some believe there was an accident. Others believe someone is hiding something. And others have gone much further, attempting to construct entire networks of relationships based on photographs, political connections, family histories, social media friendships, and other associations. But that is where a legitimate investigation can lose its credibility. A person's political connection does not prove criminal conduct. A family relationship does not prove influence. A social media connection does not prove participation. And a theory repeated 1,000 times does not become evidence. If investigators find proof that someone's relationship influenced a decision, document it. If there is evidence that a warrant was delayed improperly, document it. If there is evidence that investigators treated people differently because of who they were, document it. But don't replace evidence with genealogy. Don't replace records with speculation. Don't replace facts with viral videos. Because Nolan deserves something better than an internet conviction. And anyone who was innocent that day deserves something better than an internet conviction too. The arrest question. Which brings us back to the title of this video. No more excuses. It's time for arrests. But what does that actually mean? It does not mean arrest somebody simply because the public is angry. It does not mean arrest somebody because their story sounds suspicious. It does not mean arrest somebody because a YouTube channel believes they know what happened. And it certainly does not mean treating an accusation as a conviction. An arrest should come when investigators have legally sufficient grounds to believe a specific person committed a specific offense. But if investigators reach that threshold, then yes, it is time to act. Because an investigation cannot remain permanently suspended between questions and answers. If the evidence establishes probable cause, make the arrest. If the evidence does not establish probable cause, explain what remains unresolved and keep investigating. If additional forensic evidence is needed, obtain it. If records are needed, subpoena them. If a warrant is legally justified, seek one. If witnesses need to be re-interviewed, do it. If digital evidence needs to be examined, examine it. But do not allow an investigation to become a permanent cycle of statements, counter-statements, and unanswered questions. The DA and the question of transparency. The district attorney's office has also faced criticism over the amount of information being released publicly. There is a legitimate reason prosecutors can be limited in what they say. Active investigations involve legal and ethical considerations. Public statements can influence witnesses. They can affect potential jurors. They can expose investigative strategies. And they can interfere with an ongoing case. So silence does not automatically equal a cover-up. But the opposite is also true. Silence can create a vacuum. And when official information is limited, people fill that vacuum with theories. That's exactly what has happened here. The family has questions. The public has questions. Commentators have questions. Attorneys have questions. And the longer those questions remain unanswered, the more room there is for speculation to become accepted as fact. That is dangerous for everyone. Because if investigators eventually establish that Nolan's death was accidental, the people accused online may have had their reputations permanently damaged. And if investigators establish that someone was responsible, every day spent without pursuing available evidence matters. That is why transparency does not necessarily mean revealing every piece of evidence. It can also mean clearly explaining what can be explained. The legal pressure is growing. There is also legal pressure developing around public statements made about the young men who were with Nolan. Attorneys representing 3 young men have reportedly sent a pre-suit demand letter to Reverend Al Sharpton, seeking an apology and alleging defamatory statements. Sharpton has disputed the premise and has publicly indicated that he would welcome litigation. That is another area where caution is essential. A demand letter is not a court judgment. An allegation of defamation is not proof of defamation. And someone's willingness to sue does not establish that they are right or wrong. But there is an interesting point here. If litigation actually happens, discovery could potentially bring sworn testimony and records into the process. That could create another avenue through which facts are tested. But again, the legal system should determine the outcome. Not social media, not YouTube, not public opinion. What happens next? So what should happen now? First, preserve the evidence. Second, complete the forensic examination of Nolan's phone under a documented protocol. Third, obtain and authenticate the original emergency communications and related dispatch records. Fourth, Reconstruct the timeline from machine-generated records wherever possible. Fifth, identify who made key decisions during the emergency response. Sixth, determine what happened to relevant surveillance footage and whether any portion remains recoverable. Seventh, verify the boat movements and identities through official records rather than online speculation. And finally, follow the evidence wherever it leads. If it clears someone, say so. If it implicates someone, act on it. If it reveals that investigators were working with incomplete information, correct the record. If it reveals that the case was mishandled, address that. But whatever the evidence says, the investigation needs to get to the point where the public is no longer forced to fill in the blanks. The real question. Because maybe the biggest question in the Nolan Wells case is not, who did it? Not yet. The bigger question is, have investigators done everything necessary to determine what happened? Have all relevant digital evidence been examined? Have the original emergency records been obtained? Has the timeline been independently reconstructed? Have discrepancies between statements and machine-generated records been resolved? Have potential witnesses been fully identified and interviewed? Have relevant surveillance systems been examined? Have investigators followed every credible lead? And if the evidence now points toward a particular person, has probable cause been evaluated? Those are the questions that matter. And those questions don't belong to one side. They belong to everyone. No more excuses. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He went out on the water expecting to come home. He didn't. His family is left with questions that no mother should have to carry. And the people who were with him that day are also entitled to a fair investigation, one that clears them if they are innocent and holds them accountable if the evidence shows otherwise. That is what justice should look like, not a predetermined verdict. Not an internet mob, not a cover-up accusation without proof, and not an investigation that never seems to reach the next stage. The evidence exists somewhere. Some of it may be in court filings. Some may be in emergency communications. Some may be in digital devices. Some may be in GPS records. Some may be in witness statements. Some may be in documents that have not yet been released. And perhaps some of the answers are sitting inside Nolan Wells' phone. But questions don't solve cases. Evidence does. So if the evidence establishes probable cause against someone, then the public should not have to wait forever. Make the arrest. If it doesn't, then keep investigating until the facts are established. Because we're still looking into it cannot be the final answer forever. The Wells family deserves answers. The public deserves transparency within the limits of the law. And anyone who was with Nolan that day deserves a process based on evidence rather than speculation. So no, this is not a call to arrest someone because the internet has decided they're guilty. It's a call for something much more basic. Finish the investigation. Follow the evidence. Resolve the contradictions. Examine the phone. Reconstruct the timeline. Obtain the records. And if the evidence crosses the legal threshold, make the arrest. Because Nolan Wells deserves more than unanswered questions. He deserves the truth, and the truth should not be afraid of an investigation. If you want more updates on the Nolan Wells case as new documents, records, and verified developments emerge, subscribe to Brian Case Records and turn on notifications. And tell me in the comments, what piece of evidence do you believe investigators should resolve first? The phone, the emergency call, the boat timeline, or the missing records?